Meanwhile, air pollution and climate change are problems that must be tackled together. That's the message from the World Meteorological Organization. A new report from the UN agency says that climate change is increasing the intensity and frequency of heat waves, which is worsening air pollution. Researchers say the heat waves that triggered wildfires in the northwestern United States and Europe led to hazardous air quality last year. And smoke from wildfires contains chemicals and particles that are dangerous for human health. They also damage the environment and crops and lead to more carbon emissions. Well, let's return to the Africa Climate Summit. We can speak now from Nairobi to Bokolo Kenwendo, who's a special advisor to the UN Climate Change High-Level Champions, also a former Minister for Trade for Botswana. And Bokolo, good to have you with us. Appreciate your time. First up, we've seen billions pledged at this conference, but the reality is it barely touches the side of what's required in Africa to adapt and protect itself against the ongoing effects of climate change. What more needs to be done?
Thank you so much, Nick, for having me. Certainly, your question and positioning is the right one. And what has come out of the summit is that climate finance is inefficient, it's insufficient, and it's unfair. And what needs to be done is for us to unlock more financing through the global reforms in the international financial space, deal with the soaring debt levels that many countries are finding themselves having to deal with while balancing out financing climate action, and certainly also unlock more in equity investments and concessional financing. We have seen several proposals in this regard, Nick, and to summarize them quite quickly, the request has been, one, we see the reform of MDBs to also include climate resilience debt clauses, and this was done already in Paris, but we need to see the implementation of that. And then secondly, we need to see extra concessional lending that is related with climate action and sustainable development goals in the continent. And then thirdly, we need to turbocharge and create a space for project origination that will also cover some of those early stage losses, and then potentially have MDBs position themselves for origination to distribute.
Okay, let me just jump in there, Bokolo. When you say MDBs, can you just very, very briefly explain what you mean?
Right. So here we are talking about the multilateral development banks, so the World Bank, the IMF, right. EDBs, yes.
Okay. Now, carbon markets have been much vaunted at this conference, but there's a lot of people who don't agree with them, who say it's just buying a ticket to pollute. What's your take on it?
Well, we see carbon markets as another innovation to enable African stakeholders, be it at national level or at community level, to unlock financing for development. So it's not just about the offsets themselves, it's about the opportunity that exists in a market mechanism that has been created. Obviously, there's still a couple of issues that need to be dealt with. Many are focusing on the pricing disparity between voluntary carbon markets and the compliance markets, and we have to deal with that. We have to also deal with the transparency between project owners and the communities that are the custodians, particularly of the nature-based solutions. So there's still a couple of issues that need to be dealt with.
But what about that point about the criticism that it just gives producers, fossil fuel producers, a ticket to pollute?
I think that isn't necessarily true, because there are net zero plans that companies have to deal with, that they have to deal with that decarbonization agenda and also work at the protection of nature. And this, we already have communities, particularly for nature-based solutions, that are already protecting nature and are not seeing any real value coming into those communities. So we can unlock the value through carbon markets. We can unlock value through other financial tools for those communities that are providing lands to the world. If we do not play in the carbon market space, then what kind of value will be going to those communities? Right. Or secondly, there will be a need to look at the opportunity cost of maintaining the forests that give us oxygen.
Okay. Briefly, Bokolo, if you would, we've got 700 million plus still without electricity on the continent. So the world is saying, OK, well, you've got to get rid of fossil fuels. But how do those people develop? How does a continent develop if they don't have fossil fuels in the time that we've got?
Well, certainly we can only deal with a transition when it's fair, it's just, equitable, and ensures that there's a development at the heart of it. We cannot separate our climate ambitions from development. We need to ensure that we're creating a base of energy and accelerating the green energy to ensure that everybody has access to clean energy, to low emission economy. We cannot just talk about a decarbonization agenda that doesn't address the already existing economic disparities that have led to less development in the continent. So there's a very special case when you look into climate action into the continent of the vulnerable position, low global emissions, low development, high vulnerability to climate shocks, and high poverty. We cannot just take a blanket statement of net zero and not apply it to the situation that exists in the continent. Climate action must be an imperative of sustainable development in the continent.
OK. Bokola, great to get your perspective. Really appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. That's Bokola Okunwendo, UN Climate Change High-Level Champions Special Advisor. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks.
Cheers.